Kathy Kapelchuk. I'm the Director of Operations and Client Experience at Synergy HR Consulting. And my role is twofold. I first of all assist our CEO with running the business and the day-to-day operations, assigning clients to various engagements and matching them up with the best client and vice versa, ensuring the client gets the best skill set for what their needs are. And then I also work directly with clients on a day-to-day basis, so I get to continue to hone my technical skills and stay current with issues in HR and business. I joined Synergy HR Consulting in January of 2023. It was a dream to move into the consulting business and excited to continue to work in this field and do this challenging work. I started in HR almost 30 years ago and have worked in a variety of businesses in a variety of industries, agriculture, primarily oil and gas, real estate and integrated facility management. Having worked in a variety of businesses in a variety of roles leaves me in a great position to be able to identify with different client spaces, quickly get up to speed with their business issues, and it's a very challenging role for me. My experience level allows me to know what's important to business leaders. In our experience, we found that businesses make, in general, about 6 big mistakes, and we would like to provide input and guidance into how to avoid those mistakes and things that you can do to enhance your growth, move your people strategy forward, and generally drive your business outcomes in the direction that you want them to so that you're achieving your business goals. Businesses that are making these mistakes generally are going to find that they're getting asked questions by their employees that they don't have a ready answer to. They're seeing conflict. They're seeing people moving in different directions and things are happening in their business that they don't understand or didn't plan for. And they're generally starting to feel a little bit maybe out of control and saying, wait a minute, how come this is happening? And how do I bring it back to what I want and where this business is intended to move and grow? Once your business has addressed these issues and you've put yourself in a position to move things forward effectively, you're going to start to feel like things are moving smoother, there's less questions, and you've got the most important thing, which is alignment with your business goals. You're starting to see that your purpose, vision, values that you've developed are manifesting in your organization. People are working together, and you are efficiently driving those business outcomes. Once you've solved for these 6 potential mistakes, you're going to find that your business is more profitable and a more fun place to work. The first mistake that businesses make and leaders make within that business is assuming that people understand and know. And what we're not doing is effectively communicating, reinforcing the message. You have new people coming into your business and you forget to orient them, communicate to them, and it's an ongoing thing. And there's a tendency for it to be one and done. We've developed our purpose, vision, values, we put them on the shelf, and we don't communicate them further. We don't communicate the expectations for people in their roles, and people start to make assumptions, and that's when you start to see the pitfalls within this area. When you hire people, they come into the organization with their own ideas, experiences where they've worked before, and they come in with that context. And if you don't reset and tell them what you need them to do within your business, they're going to just go off in their own direction. And it's imperative that you tell them that this is how we roll within our organization. Otherwise, they're going to do what they've experienced in the past, which may not be aligned with what you need them to do. As a leader, you want to focus on three main areas to communicate to your employees. The first is the big picture of what the business is trying to achieve. That ties into your business purpose that you've developed. And the second thing is what their role within that picture is. So what are they there for? What is the purpose of their role? How are they supposed to contribute? And then you layer onto that the expectations for the performance within that role. So the finite goals and objectives, the measurables, the key success factors within their role, and what success in their role would look like. And that loops it back to the big picture, because if they do their part, everybody else does their part, things are connected, and overall, as a team, you achieve that big business goal. The critical piece, the first piece, the foundational piece, is being very specific about the business goal. And it needs to be articulated. We talk about SMART goals. SMART goals are an acronym, and the S is specific. They need to be measurable. They need to be achievable. You need to assign somebody to be responsible for them, and they need to be time-based or have a deadline. I worked in a business where the leader was extremely frustrated with his team and saying, I don't understand why they don't get it. I talk to them, I keep telling them, and they don't get it. They keep asking me questions and they don't understand. And this was around key business drivers, planning, figuring out where the next production areas were going to be. So very critical to the business. And I sat in on one of his meetings and thought, well, now listening to you talk, I understand why your team doesn't get it. He would get about 80% of the way through his point, and then he would stop and shrug and say, well, you know what I mean. And every single person around that table put their own meaning on the end of that point that he was trying to make. And you know, as I said earlier, people come in with preconceived notions of what they've done in previous organizations, and they fill in that blank the way they think it should be filled in, not necessarily the way he wanted it filled in. And so with some coaching and saying to him, you have to finish those sentences. You have to tell them what you mean, because otherwise they're guessing. He worked at it. It was a struggle for him, but he worked at it, and slowly people began to come together, understand, get on the same page. And then he was less frustrated. And also the team was less frustrated, because what he wasn't realizing was that the team was just as frustrated as he was, because they didn't have the direction that he thought that he was providing to them. And so they were floundering, he was frustrated, and it just came back to good old communication and finishing the thought. You know, not leaving it up to debate how that concept was to be finished. It was to be very specific and say, this is what I mean. Don't guess at what I'm meaning. This is what I mean. So once everybody was on the same page and they started to pull on the rope together, the business did turn around. Profitability increased. The business results increased, and the business is a thriving business today. So remember, communicate, communicate, communicate. The second mistake that businesses can make is to allow unacceptable behavior to go on and not be addressed. Unacceptable behavior in a business can take various forms. It can be as simple as somebody coming late to work or abusing break time. It can be conflict in the workplace where somebody is, intentionally causing disharmony and conflict among the team. And it can be a lack of performance, lack of job delivery, where somebody consistently doesn't fulfill their work expectations. It can be disrespectful or harassment or bullying type behavior. Unacceptable behavior is really what you determine is unacceptable in your business. And it can be very simple things and it can be very extreme things. But if it is not contributing to the team, it is not contributing to the business outcomes, if it's creating disharmony and chewing up your time and attention and causing you to intervene in issues that are not driving your business, then it's unacceptable. Sometimes unacceptable behavior is very overt. You can see it. You can see the person coming in late. You can see them being confrontational in a meeting. Sometimes it's much more subtle. Sometimes it's the quiet little digs that they make at a fellow employee that nobody else overhears or sees. And so you need to watch for just signs where people are uncomfortable. You can also, if it's an unacceptable behavior that is tying to their job performance or their outputs, you'll start to see their productivity drop off. You might just see missed deadlines. You can often see somebody's, a coworker who is uncomfortable with how they're being treated. They start to miss work or their performance drops off. So you'll start to see a shift in the tone and the interaction between your employees if it is, in that disruptive behavior kind of thing. And if it's more unacceptable behavior where they're not delivering on their work stuff, you will see their deadlines start to be dropped, the quality of their work dropping off, and you need to be live to those things. Quite often, we trust our employees and we don't look at their work and we don't dive into things. And so there's a rule that says you have to go in and look and you have to check things. And just by doing periodic check-ins, asking to see their work, you can start to see where things are dropping off. And when it is, in that interaction, maybe a potential situation where they're being disruptive, just checking in with their coworkers, asking the team how things are going, and creating an environment where people feel comfortable to speak about what they're experiencing. The problem is when you don't address these things, they start to build and have a much, much, much bigger impact than we expect. And it very rarely stays just with one employee. It starts to affect the whole team. When it's left unchecked and it starts to spread to the whole team, people generally look around in an organization and they start to say, well, if that person can come 5 minutes late, I guess I might as well come 5 minutes late. And it really does spread. And you end up having people look to the lowest common denominator for what's acceptable behavior. There is a basic tenet in employee relations when you start to learn about employee relations, and that is unacceptable behavior that goes unmentioned is deemed to be appropriate. And so if you don't say anything, people think it's okay. Well, if it's okay if I come 5 minutes late for work, what happens if I come 10 minutes late for work? And you have to mention it. And people don't mention it because they fear confrontation, or they say it's not a big deal. It's only 5 minutes. Maybe it's only one time. And so they don't want to draw attention to it and seem like they're petty or micromanaging their team. But you do need to draw attention to it, and you don't have to do it in a way that's punitive. You can just say, oh, traffic must have been rough this morning. I see that you're in a little bit later, or you just draw attention to it. You let them know that you noticed that they were late for work. You let them know that you noticed that they were a bit angry in a meeting. Is there something that you want to talk about? And you invite them to share. But most importantly, you let them know that you've seen it. And when you ask them about it, then it nips it in the bud very quickly and easily, rather than letting it build, because people will watch other team members, and they will mimic that behavior, and they will potentially start to let their own performance drop because they don't think it's worth making the effort if they don't see other people, or if they see other people getting away with things. So I'll give you two examples, kind of an easy one and a more difficult one. The first scenario is where people would come in to work, and the habit was we get here and we all head down the hallway, hit Starbucks, get coffee, come back. And instead of starting at 8, we all start at 8:30. And the leader being very frustrated to say, we don't start work here at 8:30, we start at 8. And so that whole notion that it's okay to go for a half-hour coffee at the start of the day and kind of roll into your day. And so just changing habits, letting people know, bringing coffee in, suggesting that they get their, arrive with their coffee. There's lots of things you can do to kind of nip it in the bud. But, you are maybe not wanting to deal with that because it's a group of people that work late, or they work on the weekends, or they pick up their phones after hours. And so maybe it's not a big deal. Maybe it is. But at its worst, I've seen a scenario where there was a serious incident. The performance was not addressed. It was well known throughout the organization that this infraction had occurred. And then down the road, a leader is coaching another employee in this, in a need to pick up their socks, change their behavior. And the employee who was being coached looked the leader in the eye and said, if so-and-so didn't get fired for what they did, there's no way you're going to fire me over this. And it was a real wake-up call for the leader. It was a shock. And the leader was saying, wow, I had nothing to say. I had nothing to come back at because the employee was right. This one major infraction had been condoned, and it undermined our ability to hold other people accountable to a performance standard down the road. And it was a very difficult situation. The organization is still recovering, still trying to mend the fences, still trying to work to change that perception and build that credibility and that performance standard back up to where they want it. But it was a very long-lasting and very difficult situation for the organization that they continue to navigate today. So it's really important that you address unacceptable behavior, that you nip it in the bud, or it could have grave implications for your organization down the road, even to the point where it creates so much disharmony that your organization suffers as a result. The third mistake that businesses make is not laying out the proper legal foundation on which their business is based. So setting out employment agreements, key policies, proper offer letters, setting yourself up to make sure that all those key foundational pieces are in place. Businesses love to skip that step, and it is a problem down the road. Fundamentally, the employment relationship is I come into work, I agree to perform certain services, and the employer agrees to compensate me and provide me certain things in exchange for that. And in any other business dealing, you would solidify that relationship with the contract. And so when we don't solidify the terms and conditions of employment upfront, it leads to the potential for disagreement, for interpretation, for I thought it meant this, but it really meant that. And you set yourself up for things to go sideways. You have nothing to rely on except verbal agreements that don't hold up. And many of the things in the employment world can lead to financial damages, so you're paying extra for a termination, for example, or even reputational damage, where people come away from that organization and say, that's a terrible place to work. They don't know what they're doing, and you don't want to work there. And that's just because things are unclear and not documented. There are 3 key documents that a business wants in place to lay its legal foundation. The first is an employee handbook, which sets out the policies and in some cases procedures. And it is ensuring that your policies are compliant with the labor legislation and regulations for the geographical area that you work in. You'll also want a properly vetted employment agreement that spells out the terms, key terms for the employment relationship, such as termination clauses, probationary periods, whether the position is eligible for overtime, key things that guide the employment relationship. And the employment agreement is usually accompanied by a very effective offer of employment, which also spells out key terms in harmony with the employment agreement. You'll want to ensure that your key documents, your handbook, your offer letter, and your employment agreement are properly vetted. We don't want to write them ourselves. We don't want to guess. You want an expert to assist you to make sure that the terms are properly worded, that you've captured all the key terms, that you haven't missed anything. And then you'll want them to be reviewed periodically, probably not once a year, but every 2 or 3 years probably, to ensure that you're keeping up with key trends and changes in legislation. If there is a key change in legislation, we're usually notified, and you would want to take action then to update your documents. Just the other day, I was reading a handbook, and it still made reference back to old Alberta legislation when you had to work 52 weeks before you were eligible for maternity leave, and that hasn't been around for years. So that handbook is clearly out of date. So you'll want to keep up with key changes and not have something in place that's offside with the regulations for the province or the federal territory that you're working in. Typically, when we talk about challenges with things going wrong when you don't have the legal foundation in place, we talk about terminations, because that's typically where people end up with the highest risk, or they've had to pay additional severance over what they would have otherwise had they had a good legal foundation in place. But I had an experience years ago where there was no documentation in place. And there was an individual who was considered to be in a management position, part of the management team, had a budget, was making decisions, but didn't have any direct reports. This individual had, over the years, received bonuses as part of the management bonus plan, became disgruntled, left the organization, filed a claim with Alberta Employment Standards to say they were due overtime. And when Employment Standards called and came in to look, they said, well, can you prove that this person understood that they were part of the management team? Because our standard is typically that they have direct reports. And we said, well, they're managing process, they had indirect reports, but we couldn't point to anything specific that said this person was part of management. We could show the trend in receiving the bonuses, but there was nothing clear cut. And it looked like we were going to have to pay several years worth of overtime, which would have been very expensive. Plus, this individual had already been, in the company's mind, compensated for this overtime in the form of a bonus. And so it was really a difficult situation. It was resolved, and it was resolved in the company's favor, only because when this individual wrote their letter of resignation, they made reference to leaving prior to receipt of their management bonus, and they were expecting that they would get their bonus in addition, subsequent to their resignation. And that one little piece of documentation was acknowledgement that the person was part of the management team and knew that they were considered management. Now, I would not recommend any business take the risk of something like that coming out of the woodwork and hoping that somewhere along the way you can come up with something in writing that gets you off the hook. Do it up front. Avoid it. Take the guesswork out of it. Document what the relationship is supposed to be. Document the terms and make sure it's clear to both parties about how the relationship is considered to exist and what the terms are. Keep in mind, the key documents, this key legal foundation that you're basing your business on, you're basing your employment relationships on, are legally based. You want expertise. You want professionals guiding you and providing you with the utmost in service in terms of getting these things right. Don't write these documents yourself. Don't pull a template that may or may not be relevant for your business off the internet. Get it right. Make the investment, because if you do get it wrong, the penalties can be quite severe. You can risk your business by having to pay large severances, by having claims come through for unpaid overtime or improperly handling your vacation pay or anything. Not only do you have to pay what's owed to the employees, but you can be assessed penalties as the owner of the business for failure to be compliant. Don't risk your business. The next mistake we want to avoid is building too much structure into your business too soon, encumbering your business with policy, procedure, bureaucracy that you don't need at this point in your growth cycle. Sometimes we have a tendency to want to add structure because, on the one hand, we want to have rules and guidelines and ensure that employees know what's expected of them. And so we want to take some of the guesswork out. So you feel the need to put a whole bunch of things in place to guide that relationship. But if you do too much too soon, you end up dealing with things that you don't need to deal with yet. So you want to wait and add things only when necessary. I like to look at building an organization similar to how you would do urban planning. And I talk to my colleagues and clients about this all the time. When you live in a small town and people understand the flow of traffic, you can come and go and you don't need a lot of traffic signs. But as you add more people, then that's when people start to kind of jam up at intersections and you need to start directing traffic. And so don't put a stoplight in where you just need a yield sign. You can add the stoplight down the road when you need it, when your organization is larger. But if a yield sign will do, just put up a yield sign for now. But be cognizant to leave yourself some room, because you know at some point in the future, you may need that intersection to be a little bit wider because you might need a left turn lane. But don't add it before you need it. A new business needs to be nimble and agile. And so if you're so busy controlling things, you're going to lose sight of your need to be able to turn on the fly and redirect. And one of the things that we see is a tendency for people to want to add structure or add bells and whistles to their organization because they think it will help them attract employees. So, at some point in the future, they may want to offer a profit sharing plan. Well, don't develop a profit sharing plan before you're profitable. Wait until you have the information. Wait until you have enough corporate history so that you can build something that's effective. Because if you build it too early, you may get it wrong. And then you may have to tweak it. And sometimes there's more damage from having to redo something than having to wait. But we want to hold it out to employees as an enticement. If you come to work for me, we're going to be adding this great profit sharing plan. So you can talk about things high level and say, this is our plan, but don't get too deep into the weeds, because you will handcuff yourself down the road, and you may build things that you don't want and that don't make sense for your business when you get there. If you do it too early, you may regret it. Do it just in time. Be mindful, have it on your horizon, but don't build it too early. The key thing when you're starting your business is to understand what you need in terms of the team and the business functions that are required at that time. And then you want to make sure that the people who join your team are clear on what their expectations are. And so you need enough structure so that people come in and they understand what their role is. They understand what the key checks and balances in the business are. They need to have some parameters for what they shouldn't do on a day-to-day basis. You need key business controls like spending authorities and who has access to your bank account and who has access to your system. So you need to have enough structure that you're protecting yourself and managing your risk, but you don't want to add so many layers and so much structure that people are ending up in busy work, managing the process instead of managing what the business is supposed to be delivering upon for the day-to-day outputs of the business. So I came into a business that was a startup. It was intended to be a grow and flip. The timeline was 3 to 5 years. We're going to sell. We'll be out of here. So coming in, you're looking at what does the business need today? It needs people, it needs employment contracts, it needs job descriptions, it needs spending limits, it needs, all those things to get going. What it didn't need was things that had an eye to the future. It didn't need a career development plan. It didn't need a university recruitment plan. It didn't need a whole bunch of things that had that future orientation. However, as time went on, it looked like the business was going to need to change its strategy. It was no longer a grow and flip. It was going to be an ongoing business. And so with that change in strategy, we needed to say, what else needs to change? And suddenly leadership development, career management, stronger performance management, a long-term incentive plan, all those things needed to be put in place to support a business that had a long time frame instead of a short time frame. So the way to know whether you need to start adding more structure, adding more content to what you're offering in terms of your services to employees or your sophistication in terms of your process is really driven by your business strategy and where you're at in your growth cycle. And you build it just in time. And if you're doing your strategy and looking forward to the future, you'll start to feel when you need to add more structure. You'll also start to see it when things begin to feel out of sync. And so in that analogy of the urban planning, people start to bump into each other. And that's when it's, am I doing this or are you doing this? This used to be one job, now it's two. So now we need to add clarity and segregate responsibilities, make it clear, manage expectations as to who's doing what, who's accountable for what. The fifth mistake that businesses can make is building a compensation paradigm that ends up with your employees feeling entitled rather than a really strong reward and performance connected compensation program. When you build a compensation paradigm or a compensation program, you usually start with a compensation philosophy statement. So you decide how you're going to pay employees. Are you going to be a leading payer? Are you going to be a middle of the road payer? And you do that based on, market data and understanding how everybody else that is competing for that same talent pays. Fundamentally, though, the first question you have to ask is, what can my business afford to pay? And there's no sense writing a compensation philosophy that says I'm going to be a 90th percentile payer if your cost structure in your business can't bear that. So you need to keep your compensation grounded in what you can afford to pay. And you have to be live to where you're competing for talent. You have to be live to what, being able to bring people into your organization and pay them what they're worth. But you can't do it at the expense of causing your business to go bankrupt because you've overpaid your employees. That just doesn't make sense. So when you're building it, you want to be live to where do I want to be in the market? What can I afford to pay? And then what tools in the compensation toolkit am I going to use? Am I paying hourly or salaried? Am I offering bonuses? Am I offering profit sharing? Can I add a long-term incentive program? There's all kinds of things that you can do, but it comes back to this philosophy. So you'll see companies that want to say, I'm going to pay middle of the road, and when we have a great year, I'm going to pay bonuses. You're going to see other companies that say, I don't want to pay bonuses. I just want to pay a really good salary. So it depends on how you want your total compensation to be delivered. You have lots of options in how to deliver that. But the one thing you don't want to do is not be clear on what an employee needs to do in order to maximize their compensation. So you need to be really connected to, if I do these things, or if the business achieves these goals, if you as an individual achieve these goals, this is the impact on your compensation. So what do they need? What specific actions and behaviors do they need to display or deliver in order to change their compensation? The mistake that businesses make is not making that connection clear, and people get money and they don't understand why. And then they expect it every year. Well, I got it last year. How come I'm not getting it this year? Because they don't understand what they did in the prior year or what the business achieved in the prior year that drove that change in compensation. So you end up with entitlement when you don't have a clear connection between what the employee needs to do or what the business needs to achieve in order to drive compensation. The one thing you want to avoid, there's really two things you want to avoid. One is tying compensation to an outside metric that you can't control, like the infamous cost of living increases. And, your business may not be able to afford that. If the cost of living is up and your business profits are down, you may not be able to keep up. So don't promise your employees something that is driven by outside forces that you can't control. And we saw that in spades recently with the high inflation, and people's expectations for salary increases were to keep up with inflation. And that's not possible for most employers to do. All their costs were up. And so tying your compensation to something that you can't control is a slippery slope. You want to tie your compensation changes to multiple factors, which may include cost of living, may include market factors, may include success in the business, but don't tie it to only one thing that you can't control. The second thing is making sure that your frontline leaders understand the connections between performance and business outcomes and compensation. And you often find that if a business has not had a really strong performance management cycle, they have not communicated to employees what their expectations are, they're not giving that feedback. When it comes time to give compensation information to the employee, the frontline leader struggles to connect the two. And so they have a tendency to abdicate. And they do it because they're not equipped by senior leaders to be able to do it. So I don't want to point the finger at them. You need to equip them so that they can effectively communicate those decisions. And I've seen countless times where an employee has received a bonus. The bonus is partially tied to corporate results. The corporate results drive a pool for bonuses. There are clear metrics. We had to hit this production level, this profitability level, this safety outcome. Like there were clear business goals. But when the leader communicated the bonus amount to the employee, they shortcut that connection to the business results. And so the employee got a bonus. The next year, their bonus is smaller. And they say, but I worked harder. I did all the things I needed to do. How come my bonus isn't bigger? And it's not bigger because the corporate drivers in that bonus pool didn't have the same results. And so the pool that we were divvying up was smaller. And de facto, their share was smaller, but because they didn't understand that tie to the corporate piece, they questioned it and weren't happy about their bonus. They weren't happy that they got as much as they could in that particular year. They only compared it to the prior year. And that's just because of messaging and lack of understanding and lack of connection. The final mistake that businesses can make is listening to the wrong people and taking the wrong advice about how to maximize your team's effectiveness. We tend to listen to people that we trust, and we often trust family and friends, and they have our best interests at heart, but they aren't necessarily experts. And so they'll give us advice, well-meaning advice, but do they truly have the technical capabilities to give us the advice that is sound and that is the right advice at the right time? Who knows? So the classic example I use here is my mom was a nurse. So growing up, we had all kinds of extra little tips because, if we were sick, she said to do this or, treating a cut. So you kind of learn. And so if you scrape your knee, I can probably give you some good advice about a scraped knee that based on what my mom told me. But that does not make me qualified to give medical advice. And I can't look at a scraped knee and decide, is it going to get infected or not? I can tell you to wash it with soap and water, put some polysporin on it. But that's all I can do. And even though I might be well-meaning, sometimes a little knowledge is dangerous. And we need to make sure that we understand who's giving us advice and whether or not we should rely on it. Well, my advice to leaders would be to listen to your gut. Sometimes, if something doesn't feel right and you've never seen something before, then it's time to just take a pause and take a beat and say, who can help me with this? And I was trained early in my career to say, the expression we used was get a partner, because two heads are always better than one. And sometimes just the process of talking through a situation brings clarity, because as you're describing it to somebody else, you're like, oh, I know what to do. But that's not always the case, because the person listening kind of smiles and nods, and maybe they can technically help you, maybe they can't. So talking it through with another person is fine, but that person needs to know, I'm not the best person to give you advice. You should call somebody. And it's just intuitive. If you need medical advice, you call someone in the medical community. If you need help with your tax return, you call a tax expert. And if you need help with your people issues, I would call somebody that has a strong background in human resources and leadership practice. So those are the 6 biggest mistakes that we see businesses making that impede their ability to have really effective teams and everyone performing at their utmost ability. Kudos to you if you are addressing these pitfalls already. Kudos to you if you're taking action to address these pitfalls already. And if you haven't been addressing them, don't worry. There's no time like the present. You've watched this video. Get going on it today. In our next video, we're going to talk about the core framework for business growth. See you there.